The Internal War, a Canon of Self-Governance by Rue. This work is not an attack on religion. It is not a rejection of sacred texts. It is not a declaration that there is no higher order. It is not an attempt to speak for creation itself. It is a refinement. Across centuries, teachings meant to awaken responsibility have often been externalized into systems of reward, punishment, and metaphysical negotiation. What began as inner transformation became outward enforcement. What began as alignment became allegiance. What began as conscience became compliance. This work removes nothing essential. It removes projection. It reads the ancient texts, not as decrees from outside the human condition, but as mirrors of it. Not as commandments imposed upon passive beings, but as descriptions of psychological law already operating within consciousness. Where the text speaks of kingdom, we examine governance of the self. Where it speaks of judgment, we observe consequence unfolding through structure. Where it speaks of sin, we recognize misalignment. Where it speaks of blessing, we observe coherence. This is not denial of transcendence. It is refusal to outsource responsibility. You do not need to abandon belief to engage this work. You only need to examine how belief functions within you. The aim is not to dismantle faith. The aim is to mature it, to refine it, to remove ego insulation from it. No one here claims to speak for creation. No one here claims final authority. This is not revelation. It is observation. It is pattern recognition. It is accountability. The war described in ancient language is not between tribes or heavens. It is between impulse and awareness, between reaction and governance, between ego and integration. If you feel resistance, observe it. If you feel clarity, examine it. If you feel challenged, sit with it. This is not about agreement. It is about alignment. This is a mirror. Nothing more, nothing less. Chapter 1. The Inner Kingdom. Book of Matthew Lenz. Internal Governance. The first battlefield is not social, not political, not religious. It is internal. The language of kingdom was never merely territorial. It was about governance, rule, authority, order. When the teaching begins with, "The kingdom is near," it is not announcing geography. It is announcing proximity of awareness. The call to metanoia, change your mind, is not emotional remorse. It is cognitive recalibration. The war begins in perception. You have heard that anger leads to violence, but look closer. Anger itself is the fracture before the fracture. You have heard that betrayal begins with action, but see clearly. Fixation precedes behavior. Misalignment does not erupt suddenly. It incubates quietly. The inner life is causal. The poor in spirit are not inferior. They are aware of insufficiency. Those who hunger for justice are not moralists. They are unsettled by imbalance. The meek are not weak. They are power under regulation. Mercy is ego-restrained. Purity of heart is clarity of intention. These are psychological states, not religious badges. When attention is stored in accumulation, the heart follows the storage. When identity is fused with possession, anxiety becomes constant. You cannot serve divided loyalties. Impulse and discipline cannot govern simultaneously. One will subordinate the other. Remove the plank before addressing the speck. This is not metaphor for politeness. It is instruction in self-audit. Projection is the ego's favorite defense. Criticism is often displaced self-avoidance. If fruit reveals the tree, then behavior reveals structure. Do not announce alignment. Embody it. Building on rock means repetition under discipline. Hearing without application is intellectual entertainment. Structure stabilizes only when practiced. The inner kingdom is not mystical. It is governance of thought, speech, appetite, and reaction. When anger is examined before expressed, the kingdom stabilizes. When desire is observed before indulged, the kingdom strengthens. When retaliation is replaced with restraint, authority matures. Maturity is not perfection. It is consistency of regulation. Love of enemy is not sentiment. It is refusal to let hostility colonize your interior. If reaction rules you, the kingdom fragments. If awareness governs reaction, the kingdom coheres. The war is not between you and the world. It is between unexamined impulse and disciplined awareness. The kingdom is not coming from outside. It is either collapsing or stabilizing within you. That is the beginning. Chapter 2. Projection and Social Ethics. Book of Luke. Lens. Inner disorder becoming outer structure. What remains unresolved inside does not stay contained. It organizes itself outward. The inner war never remains private. It builds systems. When awareness weakens, projection strengthens. When insecurity grows, accumulation increases. When ego seeks insulation, compassion declines. This is not theology. It is pattern. The teaching that the poor are blessed is not romanticizing lack. It is exposing dependency. Those without insulation see reality more plainly. Those insulated by excess often mistake comfort for stability. When identity fuses with wealth, the fear of loss governs behavior. Hoarding becomes rationalized. Indifference becomes normal. The lower impulse does not announce itself as cruelty. It disguises itself as prudence. Consider the story of the Good Samaritan. The priest and Levite pass by not because they are monsters, but because ego calculates inconvenience. Alignment interrupts calculation. Compassion is not emotional overflow. It is disciplined interruption of self-centered reasoning. The prodigal son leaves and squanders. That is obvious misalignment. But the older brother remains and resents. That is subtler misalignment. One rebels openly, the other rebels internally. Both are estranged from wholeness. Ego can wear righteousness as easily as recklessness. To whom much is given, much is required, is not threat. It is structural law. Awareness increases responsibility. Privilege increases obligation. Capacity increases consequence. When you know more, you are accountable for more. When you see more clearly, inaction becomes participation. The rich fool stores surplus while ignoring mortality. This is not merely economic critique. It is psychological exposure. Accumulation as identity breeds fragility. The more you must protect, the more you fear. What you hoard begins to own you. Judgment is projection when self-examination is absent. The Pharisee thanking himself for superiority reveals ego seeking comparison. The tax collector, aware of his misalignment, stands closer to integration. Humility stabilizes what arrogance fractures. Restitution matters. Zacchaeus does not merely feel remorse. He recalibrates behavior. Internal awareness without behavioral correction is incomplete. If misalignment created harm, alignment repairs it. Otherwise, it remains sentimental. Notice the pattern. Private insecurity becomes public inequality. Internal fear becomes external domination. Unexamined desire becomes systemic exploitation. What begins as personal impulse scales into social structure. The war inside builds the world outside. You cannot create just systems with an unjust interior. You cannot redistribute fairly while clinging privately. You cannot preach mercy while rehearsing resentment. The outer reflects the inner with disturbing consistency. This is not condemnation. It is exposure. If your interior stabilizes, your projection softens. If your attention detaches from comparison, generosity increases. If ego loosens, exclusion declines. The social world is the magnified image of private alignment or private fragmentation. The war is not simply between individuals. It is between awareness and projection. First in you, then through you. That is the expansion. Chapter 3. Pressure reveals structure. Book of James. Lens. Behavior under heat. Alignment that has never been tested is theoretical. Pressure does not create character, it exposes it. When trials arise, the instinct is to escape discomfort. But difficulty is diagnostic. It reveals whether your interior is governed or reactive. Endurance is not passive suffering. It is regulated stability under strain. If you collapse under minor resistance, the structure was fragile to begin with. Desire is not the enemy. Unconscious desire is. Impulse, when unexamined, conceives distortion. Distortion matures into consequence. Misalignment rarely begins with catastrophic action. It begins with entertained impulse. If you rehearse resentment long enough, retaliation feels justified. If you nurture envy, comparison becomes identity. Pressure does not plant these seeds, it accelerates their growth. The first sign of fragmentation under stress is speech. The tongue moves faster than reflection. You can measure the strength of your governance by how quickly you react verbally. Quick anger is not strength, it is leakage. If you cannot regulate speech, you cannot regulate life. Words direct posture, perception, and trajectory. Under heat, do you sharpen others or scorch them? That reveals structure. It is easy to agree with principles in calm conditions. It is harder to embody them when contradicted. Hearing without doing builds illusion. Knowledge without practice builds ego. You may understand discipline conceptually while living impulsively. That gap is misalignment. Favoritism appears subtle under no pressure, but stress reveals ranking behavior. Who do you defer to when threatened? Who do you dismiss when frustrated? Under pressure, ego seeks advantage. Awareness seeks fairness. Many claim to teach, few withstand scrutiny. The one who speaks often is judged more strictly because speech multiplies influence. Authority without self-regulation destabilizes quickly. If you cannot bridle reaction, your leadership is brittle. Envy and selfish ambition produce disorder. You can observe this within yourself. When comparison intensifies, clarity weakens. When ambition eclipses integrity, fragmentation follows. Peaceable wisdom is not passive, It is composed. It remains open to correction. It does not inflate itself through performance. Planning the future with certainty is an illusion of control. Your life is missed. This is not fatalism, it is proportion. If you build your identity on tomorrow's guarantee, anxiety becomes constant. Structure your action today. Release the fantasy of total control. Wealth hoarded under pressure reveals fear. Generosity under pressure reveals confidence. Complaint under strain reveals entitlement. Gratitude under strain reveals alignment. The heat clarifies composition. Alignment is not proven in comfort. It is proven in inconvenience. When you are contradicted, do you escalate or stabilize? When you are slighted, do you retaliate or recalibrate? When you are uncertain, do you exaggerate or inquire? These are not moral tests imposed externally, they are structural diagnostics. Pressure reveals whether impulse governs or awareness governs. You do not need a cosmic judge to see it. You can observe it in real time. Under heat, fragmentation accelerates. Under discipline, coherence strengthens. That is the tightening. Chapter 4. Structural Consequence. Proverbs. Repetition forms identity. What you repeat, you become. Guard your heart, because cognition directs conduct. Guard your speech, because speech directs structure. Pride precedes collapse, not because someone punishes it, but because blindness removes correction. Humility preserves vision. A gentle answer diffuses escalation. A harsh response multiplies it. The disciplined tongue preserves life. The reckless tongue erodes it. Words are seeds. Spoken often enough, they root in identity. Laziness breeds decay. Diligence compounds quietly. You do not drift into strength. You drift into weakness. Effort must be chosen. Neglect requires no intention. Walk with the wise and wisdom transfers. Walk with the impulsive and fragmentation spreads. Environment reinforces repetition. Choose proximity carefully. Wealth gained without integrity destabilizes the one who holds it. Dishonest scales corrode trust. Trust once fractured is expensive to repair. Better little with alignment than abundance with distortion. Control of appetite stabilizes clarity. Excess clouds judgment. Impulse indulged becomes impulse strengthened. Restraint practiced becomes restraint available. Conceal misalignment, and it compounds internally. Expose it, and it weakens. Correction accepted strengthens. Correction resisted hardens. Iron sharpens iron. Friction refines when ego does not dominate. Reputation is built slowly and lost quickly. A good name outlives possession. Consistency outlives charisma. The borrower becomes servant. Dependency limits freedom. Financial recklessness constrains future agency. Planning stabilizes uncertainty. Diversify effort. Sow consistently. You do not know which seed will flourish. Anger stirs conflict. Patience absorbs it. Arrogance invites humiliation. Teachability prevents it. Extremes distort balance. Moderation preserves strength. Without vision, restraint collapses. Without discipline, intention dissolves. Without awareness, reaction governs. Without repetition, growth fades. Structural law does not require enforcement. It operates through accumulation. Every habit reinforces direction. Every indulgence strengthens appetite. Every restraint strengthens governance. You do not become fragmented overnight. You become fragmented through small, tolerated misalignments. You do not become stable overnight. You become stable through small, repeated calibrations. What you allow grows. What you practice compounds. What you excuse embeds. What you confront weakens. Consequence is not revenge. It is pattern reaching maturity. That is the law beneath personality. That is inevitability. Chapter 5. Ego, Power, and Mature Love. Corinthians, Charisma, Division, and Agapē as structure. Listen carefully. Division rarely begins with ideology. It begins with identity attachment. I follow this leader. I align with that voice. Ego attaches to personality and calls it loyalty. But fragmentation multiplies where identity fuses with affiliation. The impulse to boast is subtle. It disguises itself as conviction. It presents itself as clarity. But beneath it often lies comparison. And comparison fractures unity. Knowledge alone inflates. It expands self-importance without expanding maturity. Information without integration breeds arrogance. The more one knows, the more one is tempted to perform superiority. That is not governance. That is ego expansion. Charisma can destabilize when character is shallow. Spiritual language can mask insecurity. Gift without order becomes noise. Authority without humility corrodes quickly. The body metaphor is not poetic. It is structural. No part sustains itself independently. The eye cannot despise the hand. Superiority weakens cohesion. Power tested through weakness reveals stability. When strength collapses, ego panics. When weakness appears, ego defends. But paradoxically, true power matures where ego softens. What feels like loss of control is often exposure of illusion. And here is where agapē emerges. Not affection, not romance, not sentiment. Agapē is disciplined goodwill independent of reciprocation. It is relational governance without ego demand. It is patience under irritation. It is restraint under provocation. It does not seek validation. It does not calculate return. It does not keep a ledger of injury. It rejoices in alignment, not in advantage. In Hebrew, chesed, steadfast loyalty, mirrors this. Not emotional volatility, but covenant consistency. Fidelity to relational integrity even when feeling fluctuates. Agapē does not inflate. It does not dominate. It does not manipulate. It stabilizes. It absorbs without dissolving. It corrects without humiliating. It speaks truth without aggression. Gifts without agapē fragment. Discipline without agapē hardens. Justice without agapē becomes cruelty. Agapē is not softness. It is structural maturity in relationship. When ego seeks spotlight, agapē redirects attention. When ego demands recognition, agapē remains steady. When ego competes, agapē cooperates. When ego defends status,
Agapē defends coherence. Everything partial will fade. Charisma, language, intellectual dominance. What remains is relational integrity. If your knowledge does not reduce arrogance, it has not matured. If your power does not increase gentleness, it has not integrated. The war at scale is not about belief. It is about ego seeking elevation versus consciousness seeking coherence. Agapē resolves what ego cannot, not by force, by regulation. That is mature power.
Chapter 6. Illusion and Impermanence. Ecclesiastes. The Collapse of False Permanence. Listen carefully. Much of the inner war is fueled by illusion. Illusion of permanence. Illusion of control. Illusion of exception. All is vapor, says the ancient voice. Not nihilism, but proportion. What you chase dissolves. What you accumulate disperses. What you defend decays. Generations rise and disappear. The earth continues. You can pursue pleasure relentlessly and still feel incomplete. You can construct projects, build reputation, gather resources, and still sense emptiness beneath achievement. It is not that effort is useless. It is that permanence is imagined. The ego wants continuity without vulnerability. Reality does not cooperate. Wisdom increases awareness of fragility. The more you see, the less you can pretend stability is guaranteed. The wise and the foolish both age. Both decline. Both return to dust. Mortality levels comparison. Death dissolves hierarchy. This is not morbid. It is clarifying. There is a season for everything. Not everything belongs to this moment. Not every loss is catastrophe. Not every gain is victory. Timing humbles ambition. You cannot rush what requires growth. You cannot extend what is ended. Resistance to cycles produces exhaustion. Acceptance produces steadiness. Oppression exists. Injustice persists. The world does not reward alignment mechanically. Sometimes misalignment prospers temporarily. Sometimes integrity struggles. If your discipline depends on immediate outcome, it will collapse. Alignment must detach from reward. Loving money does not create satisfaction. It creates appetite. Hoarding produces vigilance, not peace. Excess multiplies anxiety. The ego believes accumulation equals security. Reality reveals accumulation increases fear of loss. What you cling to begins to own you. You entered life empty-handed. You will exit the same way. This is not despair. It is liberation from illusion. When you remember your finitude, you recalibrate your intensity. When you remember your fragility, arrogance softens. When you remember your breath is temporary, trivial conflicts shrink. Enjoyment is not forbidden. It is proportioned. Eat, work, rest. Find satisfaction in honest effort, but do not confuse satisfaction with immortality. Gratitude stabilizes what ambition destabilizes. Do not overcorrect into extreme righteousness. That too is ego disguise. Do not plunge into reckless abandon. That fractures structure. Balance preserves clarity. Extremes often mask insecurity. Pay less attention to every criticism. You have spoken carelessly yourself. Perfection is fantasy. Consistency is maturity. The illusion is not that life has meaning.
The illusion is that it can be controlled completely. The illusion is not that effort matters. The illusion is that effort guarantees permanence. When permanence dissolves, panic surfaces, unless governance has matured. Illusion collapse is painful only when identity depended on illusion. If your stability rests in awareness rather than possession, transience does not terrify you. It humbles you. Everything you build is temporary. Everything you embody shapes you. One fades outwardly. The other stabilizes inwardly. When illusion dissolves, what remains is proportion, discipline, gratitude, and clarity. That is grounding.
Chapter 7. Collapse and Integration. Job. Ego dissolving into awareness. Listen carefully. There comes a stage in the inner war where structure alone is not enough. Governance has matured. Projection has been recognized. Behavior has been disciplined. Illusion has been exposed. And still, collapse may arrive. Loss, disruption, uncertainty, not as punishment, not as proof of misalignment, but as unveiling. The ego believes alignment guarantees stability. It assumes discipline ensures immunity. It bargains quietly. If I regulate myself, life will cooperate. But reality is not transactional. Loss can arrive without moral explanation. Structure can be shaken without fault. And this is where the final refinement begins. When everything external fractures, identity, status, security, what remains? Complaint arises. Protest surfaces. Confusion intensifies. This is not weakness. It is stripping. When your previous formulas no longer function, awareness deepens or hardens. Some cling tighter to explanation. Others release the need for certainty. The voice that once defended moral mechanics quiets. The friends inside, the part of you that insists suffering must equal failure, lose authority. You begin to see that complexity exceeds your previous categories, that humility is not defeat, but expansion. In the ancient narrative, perspective is widened not through answers, but through scale. Where were you when foundations were laid? This is not accusation. It is proportion. You are not the axis of the universe. Your perception is partial. Your control is limited. And this realization is not humiliation. It is freedom from illusion of total management. Integration happens when the demand for explanation softens, when integrity is no longer contingent on reward, when discipline continues without guarantee, when awareness rests without needing to conquer uncertainty. You may speak less now, not because you were silenced, but because you have seen more. You may judge less now, not because you lack standards, but because you understand complexity. You may react less now, not because you are indifferent, but because proportion stabilizes impulse. Collapse refines what pride could not. It dissolves certainty without dissolving coherence. It strips identity attachment without erasing integrity. It reveals that awareness can endure without total understanding. And then something quiet happens. You no longer align for reward. You no longer discipline yourself for protection. You no longer practice restraint to secure outcomes. You embody alignment because it is natural to coherence, because misalignment feels dissonant, because awareness prefers stability. Restoration, if it comes, is not triumph. It is integration. You are not the same as before collapse.
less rigid, less defensive, less transactional, more spacious, more grounded, more proportioned. The war does not disappear, but it quiets. Impulse still arises. Ego still whispers. Illusion still tempts. But governance is steadier. Perspective is wider. Attachment is looser. And so the initiation completes not with certainty, but with calm. Not with conquest, but with clarity. Not with domination, but with integration. You remain finite. You remain learning. You remain governing. But now, without the illusion that you were ever in total control. That is the quiet strength that remains.
Closing. The mirror remains. If you have followed this far, you may feel steadier, or unsettled, or quieter. That is natural. This work does not end with new beliefs. It ends with responsibility. You cannot blame impulse on temptation. You cannot blame fragmentation on fate. You cannot blame ego on the world. You cannot blame projection on doctrine. The mirror now points inward. If misalignment continues, it will not be because you lacked instruction. It will be because you chose impulse over awareness. If coherence grows, it will not be because someone blessed you. It will be because you governed yourself. Religion does not disappear here. It is refined. It is returned to conscience. It is stripped of excuse. It is stripped of performance. It is stripped of outsourcing. What remains is discipline, humility, proportion, and mature love. No one has spoken for creation in these chapters. No one has claimed to define the universe. We have only observed structure within the human condition. The war remains internal. The choice remains daily. Governance is never complete. Alignment is never automatic. Collapse is always possible. Integration is always available. If you believe, believe deeply, but govern yourself. If you doubt, doubt honestly, but govern yourself. If you follow tradition, refine it, but govern yourself. Accountability cannot be outsourced. Coherence cannot be inherited. Awareness cannot be borrowed. The mirror remains. What you do with it is yours. Silence now, and govern. Ashe.